Our next speaker is Julia Maine, who is with FB Environmental, and she is going to speak about a very interesting coastal retreat case study.
Thanks, Ellen. Is it working? Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, so as Ellen said, I'm going to be talking about a case study of coastal retreat on Chebeague Island. And so just something to note, the site that I'm going to be talking about, which is called the Hook, it's not a coastal bluff, it's a sandy beach dune system. So that's a little bit different than some of the things we've been talking about today. But I think the key takeaways and sort of the decision-making process are relevant to really any site where you might be considering coastal retreat as an option. So what is coastal retreat? So coastal retreat is when we take at-risk infrastructure, buildings, or activities, and we move them out of harm's way. And so today I'm going to be talking about coastal retreat in the context of coastal erosion and shoreline change. So this is the site I'm going to be talking about. It's called the Hook. It's also called Indian Point or Indian Island. And it's this hook-shaped spit of land. It's a sandy beach and dune system, and it's located on the southwest side of Great Chebeague Island. So some other things about this site, it's privately owned by the Indian Island Company, which is a collective of residents in the area. There's a conservation easement on the property with the Chebeague and Cumberland Land Trust, and that easement allows for public access on part of the property, and so this red area here, this is the private access, and then the beach area is the public access area. And then additionally, the town used to be responsible for maintaining the access road to the site. This is a gravel road and also the parking lot. So the site is kind of complicated because there's really three different entities who have some sort of responsibility here. And also, it's a public access point, and so the whole community really had a stake in this property as well. So it's not just Chebeaguers who think that the Hook is special. It's part of the National Coastal Barrier Resource System, and it's also a designated main sand dune. And so both of these designations recognize that the Hook is a very dynamic sand beach system, and that it's important and significant ecological habitat. These designations also limit what types of human activities can happen in these areas. Allison touched on that a little bit. And so both the fact that the Hook had these designations played a role in the ultimate decision-making process. So what did happen at the Hook? So this is a picture from the early 90s, and you can see there's this is my sister, not me. And you can see that there's this big sandy beach area here. The dunes are really high, and then there's this wooden bulkhead back here. And that was providing some shoreline stabilization to help protect the road. So just keep this picture in mind as I move through the next few slides. So as I said, this is a dynamic system. It had been shifting and changing for generations. But in recent years, we saw some pretty significant shoreline changes that started this conversation in the community. So this is what the shoreline looked like in 2020. And so you can see there's this path that leads from the parking lot to the beach. There's the big sandy beach area, the bulkheads right here with the dunes behind it, and then the access road and the parking lot. And so at this point, there was some erosion around the road, but it was pretty intact. So this is what things looked like in 2020, and just keep an eye on these 2 points as I move to the next slide. So this is what the shoreline looked like in 2021. So there were some pretty substantial changes. The path here was completely gone. The beach had migrated all the way to the edge of the parking lot. There is erosion along the road behind the bulkhead. And so these are some photos that show what it looked like on the ground. So you can see it was, some pretty significant erosion issues. And so at this point, there was concerns about access to the site, and the road was closed to cars because they're worried that these erosion areas would make it not safe to drive down here in a car. So this really started the conversation about access and parking and what type of access could happen at this site and could happen safely at this site. So in the spring of 2021, the community started having conversations with DEP about emergency repairs to the road to help maintain vehicle access down to the beach area. In June, at town meeting, the town appropriated funds to do some repairs to the road, and then hired an engineer to come up with some designs for the road. So at this point, some community members also reached out to Pete. He'd been mapping the dunes out on, or the beaches, I should say, out on Chebeague for a number of years. And so people asked him to come out and do some presentations to help people, understand the dynamics of this particular system, understand climate change and sea level rise, to help them evaluate the different options that they were looking at. So these were really, at this point, these were the three options that the community was evaluating. So it was protect, adapt, or retreat. And so the protect option was really about stabilizing the shoreline, repairing that bulkhead, building up that bulkhead wall to help protect the road and maintain vehicle access down to the beach. There was also a lot of interest in living shoreline approaches, which we've talked a little bit about today. And this is providing some more natural shoreline stabilization, like the work that Pete's done out at Popham. And so that was definitely something that the community was considering. Then retreat, for this site, that really meant adjusting the access, closing the road to vehicles, making it pedestrian access only, and then moving the parking area to a less vulnerable location. So on one end of the spectrum, you had shoreline stabilization, protecting the road and maintaining vehicle access. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you had losing vehicle access, but maintaining or preserving the natural processes of the system. And so that was really what the community had to reckon with and, understand kind of what was most important at this site and, what were their values in relation to this site. So then in 2022, the engineer presented designs to the community, and there was really two options. There was a short-term option, which was sort of a temporary seasonal stabilization measure, which the engineer even admitted was not going to be particularly effective for the type of erosion that this site was experiencing. There was also a long-term shoreline stabilization approach, which was basically a retaining wall that would run along the road. And that could potentially have some negative impacts on the rest of the system. And also the estimated cost for that was about $1 million, they said. So at this point, the community kind of took a step back and really reevaluated whether shoreline stabilization was the best approach for this particular site, whether they could really afford that. And, also if it kind of aligned with their values for this site. So in June at town meeting, the town decided not to spend the money that had been appropriated on repairs to the road. And then later that summer, there was a workshop with all of the partners to kind of chart a path forward and really figure out what to do next. And so Pete attended that workshop. Thank you, Pete. I think he's wearing the same shirt. And so I think this was really important. He and others provided a lot of education and outreach that helped people understand the system and how the different types of options, what they would actually look like in this system. And again, that really helped people make an informed decision. So kind of through all of these conversations in this process, the town and the Indian Island Company and the community decided to retreat. And so this meant making no repairs to the road, closing it to vehicles, making it pedestrian access only. And right now they're looking at alternative parking areas. So that's kind of where we are right now. And then the December 2022 storm happened. And so the decision to retreat had already been made, but this was really devastating to this site. It's a southwest exposure. And so that it was really hit really hard by this storm and then also by the storms this past winter. So you can see it just sort of, the dunes were totally overtopped and the road was really eroded. And so this is what the site looks like now, and it looks completely different. And, this is really hard for people. I mean, it's hard for me, it's a place I've known my whole life, and it looks completely different. And, it's also a little bit treacherous and precarious to access now. And so I think for a lot of people, these last few storms really emphasized a lot of the things that Pete and others had been talking about the inevitability of shoreline change at this site. I think for other people, there are still folks in the community who felt that if something had been done at this site, that this wouldn't have been the outcome. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, this was a really contentious process. It was a really difficult decision. And at the end of the day, it's not like it was a unanimous decision. So I think it's just, important to know that it's not sort of happy-go-lucky. And so right now the community is also thinking about, what are some options for actually restoring this area and, kind of trying to return it to sort of what makes it so special. So why did the community decide to retreat? I think one of the things that was really important here was all the education and outreach that was done by Pete and by others. And this really helped the community to develop a better understanding of the sand dune processes of this particular site, the coastal barrier resource designation, and also the climate change impacts at this site. It helped people to make a more informed decision and to really understand how the different options aligned with their values. So additionally, the short-term stabilization option was not going to be very effective, and then the long-term shoreline stabilization option was going to be very expensive and also potentially have negative environmental impacts. And then finally, the extreme storms that we experienced over the last couple of years also made people question whether doing shoreline stabilization at the site, how effective would it really been during those storms. So, what are the key takeaways for all of you? I think the first takeaway is that retreat can be a viable option, and it is worth considering. I think that our first reaction is often that we need to protect. And I think especially after the storms this winter, that's where a lot of people are at right now. But sometimes retreating can be the best option or could be the right option for you. And it might align better with what's most important to you about a particular area or particular site. Deciding to retreat is not going to be easy. This was a very emotional process for Chebeague. There's a sense of loss, I think, that comes with deciding to retreat. And so be prepared for that. And, I think it can be the right decision, but it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And then finally, listen to what nature is telling you about your particular site. I think this is ultimately what happened at the Hook. Basically, nature was saying, we're going to take this shoreline whether you like it or not. And I think the community heard that and said, okay, we're going to let the shoreline do its thing, and then we're going to continue to use the beach in, whatever state it ends up in.